Warning: these social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre.
Good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here for another edition of In Case You Missed It News now on this 13th day of December, Monday. Hopefully you guys are doing well. A little chipper in these parts here this morning, and I got a lot of ground to cover here this morning here by way of some financials. A lot of stuff come through over the weekend. We're going to get to all of it. We'll talk a little bit about Kellogg's plans to permanently replace 1,400 striking workers. Oh, talk about some reserve currencies, U.S. shale oil. Hackers blame for cream cheese shortages. Hey, there's a new one. World leaders have to face the truth about oil demand. We're going to talk a little bit about inflation, of course, seems to be a mainstay here. DHL keeping pace with the holiday shipments, all that stuff. And smash and grab thieves seems to be the new profession of choice here. We're going to get into all of that and more. Stick around. I'll be right back.
Everybody, Spectre here. Just wanted to give a big thank you to all you guys who continue to support my work. Jump in, day out on the streams, support all the various pieces I put out, etc., etc. And in doing so, I figured what the heck, we'll put some merch out there if you guys wish to continue to support and help defray some of the costs of streaming, which many of you guys know many of us incur. Got a handful of shirts and ad here. Spectre Does News. We got the Realize, Real Lies shirt and that you hear on my PSA periodically. And of course the No BS insignia from the show I do over on the 5x5 channel, all of which you can get for the low price of $19.99. Aside from that, you can get the Let's Go Brandon hashtag FJB shirt as well in a variety of colors. And I've recently added the hoodies in a variety of colors you can get right there as well. And last but not least, you can grab yourself a No BS shirt and the Zip Up hoodie as well. If you don't want any articles of clothing, well, you can grab yourself a mug or a 20-ounce water tumbler if you wish. Your choice. And of course, as always, just want to thank you, the listeners, the audience, those who are in chat day in, day out. Thank you for your continued support.
All right, into it we go here this morning. We'll start off with the old weather map here. Radar looking not too bad across the old USA here today. We got some storms and whatnot. Looks to be cruising across the west. Maybe a few spotty things net cruising across the Midwest, maybe lower south. And perhaps a couple things up in the northeast. Hopefully a lot quieter than what we saw over the weekend. If you were with me on Saturday, we covered quite a bit of the storm aftermath and that took place Friday night into Saturday. If you missed it, you can check it out on the channel here. It's up on the backup channels and that as well over on Gab TV, YouTube, Rumble, and the like. Let's see here. Also, temperature-wise here this morning. Come on, mouse, function here. Apparently, mouse needs a little coffee here or something. Temperature-wise, not looking too terrible bad, I suppose. Looks like we're, in the 30s, about normal for this time of year. I'll keep an eye on this little cold pocket here, see if that's going to chase across the old country here. And of course, last week, we talked a little bit about the polar vortex and how things have shifted that way. Probably appease the natural gas futures chasers and whatnot, so probably something to keep an eye on. Aside from that, this morning, let's get into the futures ramp on China's stimulus hopes ahead of the central bank barrage. It says U.S. futures rose again, starting the Santa rally predicted over the weekend by Goldman after the underlying index surged to a record on Friday, with risk appetite returning ahead of this week's barrage of central bank meetings, including the Fed on Wednesday, followed by the Bank of England and ECB. Nasdaq 100 futures climbed 0.4% as major technology and internet stocks rose in pre-market trading, with Apple inching closer to a $3 trillion market valuation. S&P 500 futures rose 11 points or 0.2%, with the Dow Jones futures also rising 0.2%. Here we see our E-mini S&P futures. I don't know where that is. I can't even read it on this thing. But anyway, there's our graphic for the day. Chinese developers' bonds and shares experienced a wave of selling after the sudden plunge in ICYMI Group's notes restarted concern over the health of the sector's 10-year Treasury yields as they inched lower to 1.4684%, and the dollar pushed higher. Bitcoin extended losses toward 48 grand as Binance bailed on plans for a Singapore exchange. Traders paired bets that the Bank of England will raise rates next year as concerns over fresh COVID restrictions outweighed inflation fears. And some of the movers on the day here today, Arena Pharmaceuticals soars after Pfizer agrees to buy it for $100 a share in cash. Apple shares rose 1%, leaving the stock close to hitting $3 trillion market capitalization if the move holds. Airbnb, Lucid, Zscaler, and Datadog shares all rise in U.S. pre-market trading, with the companies set to be added to the NASDAQ 100 index later this month. Peloton Interactive shares gain after the home exercise firm put out an advert responding to a scene in a TV show, and just like that, where a character dies using its product. The stock closed 5.4% lower on Friday, the day after the episode aired. Therapeutics MD fell 25% in pre-market trading after the FDA said it couldn't approve revisions to some manufacturing testing limits for the Innovera birth control ring requested by the company through a supplemental new drug application. So there we have that. And of course, cruising down to the old market snapshot on the day, S&P 500 futures up 0.4% to 47.28 even. Stocks Europe 600 up 0.7% to 478.82. The Nikkei's up 0.7% to 28,640.49. Shanghai Composite up 0.4% to 36.81 and change. The Brent futures up 0.8% to 75.74 a barrel. Gold spot up 0.1% to 1784.20 per ounce. US dollar index up 0.34% to 96.42, and euro down 0.4% to 1.1265. Some other overnight news out of Bloomberg: almost 20 central bankstas meet this week, including the world's biggest. No surprise that volatility term structures in the major currencies remain inverted as the market awaits former guidance that could shape trading for the better part of 2022. The Bank of Japan offered to buy 2 trillion yen, or about 17.6 billion, of government bonds under repurchase agreements after repo rates jumped to a 2-year high. Turkey's central bank intervened in the market by selling FX after the lira tumbled past 14 to the dollar for the first time, piling pressure on a central bank that's forecast to keep cutting interest rates this week despite rising inflation. The decline came after S&P Global Ratings lowered the outlook on the nation's sovereign credit rating to negative on Friday, citing risks from the extreme currency volatility. The ECB's biggest decision this week is to decide if it can still call the current inflation spike transitory. The answer will have a huge bearing on the euro area economy, which is already dealing with the resurgent coronavirus infections, new restrictions and lockdowns, and uncertainty about the Omicron variant. ECB Vice President Luis de Guindos is self-isolating after testing positive for COVID-19 on Saturday, the ECB said in a statement posted on its website. Guindos hasn't been in close contact with ECB President Christine Lagarde over the past week, according to the statement. The Spaniard, who is double vaccinated and has very mild symptoms, will work from home until further notice. Whew, thank God for that. Gotta look out for our bankstas. 2 doses of the Pfizer Inc. and AstraZeneca plc vaccines induced lower levels of antibodies against the Omicron variant, increasing the risk of COVID infection, according to researchers from the University of Oxford. And out of news squawk, back over to Asia, Sharium units merge to form largest India retail financier. Intel is to spend $7 billion on big Malaysia chip-making expansion. Shimao Group appoints Ji Kun as executive director, and Daimler reveals Chinese partner BAIC raised stake to almost 10%. Back over to Europe. European gas power prices surge on Nord Stream 2 worries. UK says can't rule out shutting schools as Omicron spreads. UBS Global Wealth Management discontinues US dollar treasury coverage. And Vivendi has never been a threat to Lagardère, Arnaud Lagardère. All right, so there's that. And on the old calendar here today, nothing scheduled. So pretty quiet day by way of any sort of reports coming out and any sort of talks and things of that nature from the old banksters. So aside from that, backing things up here a couple days, or back to Saturday at least, Epoch Times had this piece: Kellogg plans to permanently replace 1,400 striking workers. And we've covered this a bit here in recent weeks that plenty of strikes going on around the country, people demanding higher wages, better benefits, all that good stuff. These guys have been out there for quite some time. But Kellogg plans to permanently replace some 1,400 workers who've been striking since October, the company announced this week. Says Kellogg and the Bakery, Confectionery, Tobacco Workers, and Grain Millers International Union failed to reach a new contract agreement, leading to the planned change. Says we have made every effort to reach a fair agreement, including making 6 offers to the union throughout negotiations, all which have included wage and benefits increases for every employee. Says it appears the union created unrealistic expectations for our employees. Chris Hood, president of Kellogg North America, said in a recent statement. The prolonged work stoppage has left us no choice but to hire permanent replacement employees in positions vacated by striking workers. These are great jobs, and posting for permanent positions helps us find qualified people to fill them. While certainly not the result we had hoped for, we must take the necessary steps to ensure business continuity. We have an obligation to our customers and consumers to continue to provide the cereals they know and love, he said. The strike started because of disputes over pay, benefits, and the prospect of more jobs being moved to Mexico. Workers are striking at factories in 4 states: Michigan, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. The union said workers overwhelmingly voted to reject the tentative agreement and that the strike would continue. Says striking Kellogg workers stand outside the company's cereal plant in Omaha, Nebraska on December 2nd. So there's the signage there. Says just days earlier, Kellogg said a tentative deal was reached, but that workers would have to vote to approve it. The plan to replace the striking workers permanently drew criticism from resident Joe Biden, who called himself deeply troubled by it. Permanently replacing striking workers is an existential attack on the union and its members' jobs and livelihoods. I strongly support legislation that would ban that practice, he said on Friday. Rep. Andy Levin also offered support for the workers, writing on Twitter, "If we seek to be a democratic society with broadly shared prosperity, workers must be free to organize and bargain, and yes, strike, without fear of losing their jobs." Dems and several Republicans want to pass a bill called the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which would strengthen penalties for employers that violate workers' rights and enhance workers' ability to boycott and strike. For example, the bill would amend the National Labor Relations Act and make it an unfair labor practice to permanently replace an employee who participates in a strike. So, interesting wrap up on that article there. Where our Powell's heads are at on trying to protect jobs. I'm certainly quite opinionated of unions as a whole. I personally believe they had a place back in the day to, you know, essentially help protect the workers net from unsafe working conditions and things of that nature that were much needed, probably back in the day of as the start of the Industrial Revolution began. However, if you look at how unions have since played out and how they're more used as lobbyist arms and pimps and pushers of dollars into Democratic pockets, I don't know. To me, it's still a bit sketchy, and perhaps maybe this could be done another way. Just my opinion, of course. So, anyway, aside from that, here's how reserve currencies have evolved over 120 years. You ever wondered that? Says over the last 120 years, the popularity of different reserve currencies have ebbed and flowed, reflecting the shifting fortunes of leading global economies. Says, for example, in the year 1900, the US dollar and pound sterling made up 0% and 62% of global reserves, respectively. But fast forward to 2020, and visual capitalist Aran Ali notes the pound now represents just 4.7% of global currency reserves, while the US dollar stands at nearly 60%. So today's motion graphic from James Eagle looks at the year-over-year change in currency reserves as a portion of total reserves, spread across 120 years. So I'm going to let that play through it. It was kind of fascinating when I watched it here the other day. Let this play through. It'll take about a minute and enjoy. Alright, so that was a little bit ratchety. I think it's competing with all my fly-ins in here for some RAM here on the old machine. But nonetheless, 2020 here, you can see the US dollar currently stands at about 59% of global reserves out there. You see the British pound sterling, and that's still sitting at about 4.7%. The Japanese yen at 6%, and the euro at 21.2% currently. And then there's an assortment of others in the mix as well. Dropped a link out there if you guys wish to check that out on your own as well. But what is a reserve currency? Well, for those that don't know, a reserve currency is a large quantity of currency held in reserve by monetary authorities like the old central banks does. Currencies are often held in reserve in preparation for investments and transactions, among other things. Our vast global trade system, which is approaching 20 trillion in value, means plenty of currencies are always needed in reserve. In fact, an estimated 5 trillion in currency swaps hands every single day. Says here are some reasons that currency reserves are held. You got exchange rate stability for the domestic currency, to ensure liquidity in times of crisis, and to diversify central bank portfolios, which can reduce risk and improve credit ratings. All things equal, countries benefit economically from greater demand for their respective currencies. So, the rise and fall of reserve currencies, some economists argue that the demand for currencies is, in the long run, revolves around the economic relevance of a country. In general, the larger and more powerful a nation's economy is, the greater the network effect, and the more interlinked they are to the global economy. Thus, the greater demand there is to hold their currency in reserve. And the last 120 years of currency reserve data shows support for this claim. For example, Japan's economy hit a peak in terms of its relative share of global GDP in the early 1990s, just before the effects of the lost decade were felt. Subsequently, their peak as a reserve currency was around the same horizon at 9.4% in 1990. America's era of dominance says due to the economic strength of the United States in the post World War II era, the dollar is what economists call a vehicle currency. This means many non dollar economies will choose to engage in international transactions using the dollar. These smaller and less accepted currencies are often converted to US dollars before proceeding with any business or trade dealings. This is why, although Asian economies tend to have neighboring states as their top trade partners, they still engage in a massive portion of these transactions with the US greenback as a currency of choice. Here are some facts that further exemplify the strength and power of the US dollar. More than 65 countries peg their currencies to the US dollar. 5 U.S. territories and a number of sovereign countries, such as Ecuador and Panama, use it as an official currency of exchange. And around 90% of all forex trading involves the U.S. dollar. Additionally, the dollar is often seen as a haven in times of extreme uncertainty and tumult. Given its status as a world reserve currency, it can be perceived as less risky and can withstand economic shock to a greater degree relative to other currencies. And of course, new challengers to the dollar says in the not too distant past, the U.S. displaced the UK economically and as a world's reserve currency. Today, the U.S. economy is showing signs of slowing down based on GDP growth. China is on the rise, having already displaced the U.S. as the EU's top trade partner, and with projections for China to overtake the U.S. as the world's largest economy before 2030 in nominal terms, could a new global reserve currency emerge? Remember, nothing lasts forever. So, an interesting take on that, and yes, as noted here, and as this graphic wrapped up, US dollar currently sitting at roughly 59-60% of all currencies out there. Many speculate that the dollar could eventually become undermined or perhaps go away in favor of another currency in the future, and only time will tell. And of course, with our economic woes here inside the country, perhaps that may be sooner than later. So, aside from that, U.S. shale slams Biden's oil policies. A piece out of oilprice.com. Svetlana Paraskova says U.S. shale producers have been disappointed with the Biden admin's policies regarding the oil and gas industry for nearly a year now, and they voiced their disappointment once again at this week's World Petroleum Congress in Houston. Says while the U.S. administration was calling repeatedly on OPEC Plus to pump more oil to stop the rally in U.S. gasoline prices, which hit a 7-year high a few months ago, it failed to reach out to domestic producers first for more supply, shale executives and industry associates say. Instead of asking OPEC Plus and countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Russia to pump more oil, the admin should have laid the foundations for a faster recovery of U.S. oil production, when producers curtailed last year in response to the crash in demand and oil prices, executives say. Not that everyone would have listened, the oil companies have now switched to a shareholder returns mode, from record production mode to finally reward investors after years of splurging on record production and seeing little, or in many cases, negative cash flows. Shale executives started to express their criticism of the Biden admin weeks ago, when officials openly pleaded with OPEC Plus to increase supply to relieve prices at the pumps in the United States. It says now many of those execs gathered in Houston to reiterate their view that you should have called us first. But of course, we know better because old Biden and his residency and campaign was never about America first. It's all about the Build Back Better, which we've heard mouthed out of the likes of Bojo and old Biden himself and many other leaders of various countries, which ties directly to Davos and the World Economic Forum. not about America first. So enormous profits. The energy industry is making enormous profits. They're back up to above where they were before the scamdemic started. So they have taken advantage of that moment, the profits, to be able to engage in shareholder buybacks. For example, U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm said last month when President Joe Biden announces plans for a release of 50 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in a bid to lower gas prices. And of course, how many of you saw drops at your gas pumps all around the country because, oh, good old hearted crazy Uncle Joe released those 50 million barrels from the SPR? What was that? Maybe a few pennies? Anybody? Anyway, the U.S. shale pitch, however, is not racing to boost supply too much. One reason is the still widely prevalent capital discipline, but another is wariness and uncertainty about the Biden admin's policies toward oil and gas, and said administration's calls on OPEC Plus to pump more while imposing more restrictive measures on drilling on U.S. federal land. And it says Pioneer Natural Resources CEO, they have not called me. Says their first response was to call OPEC and ask them to pump more oil. They have not called me, Pioneer Natural Resources CEO Scott Sheffield told the Financial Times on the sidelines of the Houston Energy Conference. And we're the largest Permian producer, Sheffield added. Pioneer Natural Resources and many other public oil and gas producers cannot change capital budgets and drilling plans overnight, especially now they are scrutinized by investors demanding higher returns. The U.S. shale has not been happy with the admin's continued engagement with OPEC Plus on oil supply, while there is such, and it is abundant, in America. And again, I'll highlight yet again, 1 year ago, we were energy independent and exporting energy. 100 DJT. That is known. Says, I think first you stay home, you ask your friends, and you ask your neighbors to do it. And then if we can't do it, you call some other countries, Occidental CEO Vicky Holub told CNBC last month. So bottom line, we have plenty of, one, supplies underground here. Number two, the Biden admin sought the likes of OPEC Plus to up the ante as opposed to American companies here where we have rich reserves. And keep in mind, this is the jackass that shut down the XL pipeline on day one. And then we sit here and wonder why we have high oil prices. But hey, if we just released, 20, 30, 40, 50 million barrels out of the old SPR, that ought to be enough to satisfy them, right? Wrong. Idiots. And this is all planned, folks. Aside from that, switching gears a bit, hackers blame for cream cheese shortage currently afflicting the U.S. How many of you guys are having a cream cheese shortage on your store shelves? Some are calling it the most important news story in the U.S. right now. Thanks to a cyber attack and crippled Schreiber Foods, the largest cream cheese manufacturer in the U.S., for a few days back in October, thanks, Putin, the U.S. is now struggling with a shortage of schmear, which is particularly troubling for New Yorkers who are known to enjoy a toasted bagel with a hefty serving of the stuff, perhaps along with some lox and capers. Without a reliable source of cream cheese, millions of bagel-loving Big Apple residents are probably contemplating consuming their favorite breakfast with butter and jam, like an Englishman. Oh no, terrible. Says what's worse, the hackers who carried out the attack on Schreiber knew enough to time the shutdown to coincide with the busiest season for cream cheese demand. During the holidays, Americans use cream cheese to bake cakes and treats, and new holiday flavors like pumpkin spice cream cheese. Yeah, that's a real thing, and they go flying off the shelves. And October is the last month for companies like Schreiber, which has few rivals, to ensure they have enough stock to last the season. Since cream cheese is made fresh, there are no reserves to draw from. According to Bloomberg, it's just one more example of how, presumably Russian-backed, hackers have contributed to the chaos afflicting the American food supply, as well as the supply of certain foodstuffs around the world. This, in turn, contributes to the inflationary pressures plaguing the U.S., where, according to Friday's landmark CPI report, prices are rising at 6.8% year over year, their fastest pace since 1982. And of course, we talked about that. Schreiber isn't the only food related company being targeted by hackers. They also targeted meat giant JBS and an Iowa grain cooperative this year. According to Andrew Novakic, an ag economist at Cornell University, cream cheese is particularly vulnerable to supply chain issues. Some manufacturers have had problems sourcing starch, a thickening agent, as well as packaging the plastic film and cardboard boxes. Additionally, labor shortages, such as a shortage of truck drivers, is hitting the dairy industry particularly hard because drivers need an extra license to pick up milk from farms. Yet another example of how the U.S.'s own bureaucratic red tape is helping to exacerbate the labor shortage. And I would imagine that, thinking back on DJT's presidency, if you remember right, for every regulation that came into existence, were there not at least two regulations that were to fall off? And if you think back to the end of 44's presidency, at no time in history had any president ever written as many regulations and put on the books than Obama did. So think of that as we see some of these scenarios play out, just how regulated everything is from these bureaucracies, which, by the way, nobody elected. World leaders have to face the truth about oil demand. Another piece out of oil price from Marina Slav says across the world, politicians are grappling with the reality of expensive energy. Price shocks, scarcity, and energy poverty are on the cards after 2 consecutive years of underinvestment in the oil and gas industry. World leaders might have to acknowledge that oil and gas demand are here to stay for the foreseeable future. And of course, we've seemingly talked ad nauseum about that here on the broadcast as well. The COP26ers, Nat, their heads are about to explode, and anybody else with Greenpeace and whoever all else these idiot groups are that pop up to try and block drilling and environmental issues, things of that nature, their heads are probably exploding at this point. Says our products make the world run. This is what Chevron's chief executive Mike Wirth said at this week's World Petroleum Congress in Houston. The statement echoed a sentiment expressed by other oil execs during the event. Oil and gas are indispensable and will continue to be indispensable for the observable future and beyond it. Says this is not something that a lot of people want to hear. It is certainly not what environmental organizations want to hear. It is certainly not what the Biden admin and the EU want to hear, yet it appears to reflect a hard reality. I'll think of that here for a second. These guys have no grounds in reality. Every day you hear Saki up there at the old podium manufacturing her own version of reality. So, what do you think the likelihood, folks, is that these people will actually get grounded by this, and perhaps realize that yeah, this wind and solar garbage net that they want to push probably isn't going to be something that's going to be a flip of a switch, turn on, and voila, everybody's fat, dumb, and happy on it. It's not going to happen, is it? Says Europe is struggling with record gas prices, and yet its gas inventories are being depleted at the fastest rate in about a decade because of a colder than usual start of the winter across much of the continent. In the U.S., gas prices have become a top priority for an administration that came to power with a promise to reduce the country's consumption of fossil fuels. Whether everyone likes it or not, quitting oil and gas will not be as easy as some hope. I understand that publicly admitting that oil and gas will play an essential and significant role during the transition and beyond will be hard for some, said the chief executive of Aramco, Amin Nasser, also at the World Petroleum Congress. But admitting this reality will be far easier than dealing with energy insecurity, rampant inflation, and social unrest as the prices become intolerably high, and seeing net zero commitments by countries start to unravel, he said, as quoted by the Financial Times. The price of electricity is already getting intolerably high in many parts of Europe that were, until recently, used to affordable and secure energy. This, unless it's tackled urgently, could indeed lead to social unrest. There are few things more flammable than public opinion in the middle of winter, amid an energy shortage and the risk of blackouts. Oil and gas continue to play a central role in meeting the world's energy needs, and we play an essential role in delivering them in a lower carbon way, Chevronsworth said, as quoted by the Wall Street Journal. In the news from Europe since September, or if the news from Europe in September is any indication, Worth is correct in his prediction. However, supply may be tight due to underinvestment, which is at least in part the result of the rush to replace oil and gas with renewable energy. Price shock, scarcity, and energy poverty are on the cards after 2 consecutive years of underinvestment in the oil and gas industry, a report by IHS Markit and the International Energy Forum said this week. This year's investments in the industry would be about $341 billion, which is 23% lower than pre-pandemic investment levels of $525 billion. And that's despite using global demand for the commodities, the report noted. Oil and gas investment will need to return to pre-COVID levels and stay there through 2030 to restore market balance, the report's authors wrote, with the Secretary General of the IEF saying, as quoted by Upstream Online, the energy crisis in Europe and Asia this winter is a preview of what we can expect in the years ahead. So we'll break from that there. Get the idea. We've seemingly talked a bunch about that here. We've watched it play out in China, in India, in Australia, all across Europe, in the UK, here in the United States. At the end of the day, these big dummies don't know any better that, hey, wind and solar are going to be very unreliable. The knuckleheads can't even figure out that in September off the coast of the UK there was zero wind to spin their turbines, and then sit here and wonder why gas and oil are still going to be needed. And then you throw on top of that the knuckleheads in the media who don't know the difference between thermal coal and other types of coal used for other types of manufacturing and everything else. And you can understand why we're where we're at. So oil and gas will be here. On inflation, Friday's 7% increase in consumer prices is 11% when house prices are added. Well, why is this important? Well, we talked about inflation a little bit on Friday, but the government, as they like to do, is looking to change the definition of how CPI is calculated. Shocker, right? Just like they changed the definitions of vaccines or what it means to be fully vaxxed or continually move the goalpost. Well, they got to get in there and tinker just a little bit to tweak things to make things look a little better for them, don't they? So this is a piece by Joe Carson, former chief economist at AllianceBernstein, says consumer prices rose 0.8% in November, pushing the increase in the last 12 months to nearly 7%. That represents the most significant increase since 1982. But in reality, the current inflation rate is much higher than what is reported and above that of 1982. Says the shelter component of the CPI, which has the most significant weight, increased 3.8% in the past year. That compares to a 7 to 9% increase at the highest point in 1982. But that is not an apples to apples comparison. In 1982, the CPI shelter component included house prices for owners, housing costs. But nowadays, a shelter component for owners' housing is based on a non-market rent index. House prices are up close to 10 to 20% in the past year versus a 3.5% increase in owners' rent. Adjusting today's shelter measurement for the rise in house prices and removing the owner's index would result in a significant boost to the reported inflation rate. And it says, based on my calculation, today's inflation rate would top 11%. It says, Bill Ackman agrees. It says, reported inflation is understated. Owner's equivalent rent relies on owner surveys to estimate inflation and housing costs. This is an extremely imprecise metric. The single-family rental market provides more accurate data. OER in today's reported core CPI was 3.5% year over year. The largest owners of nationwide single-family rentals are reporting 17% year-over-year rent increases. OER is 30% of the core CPI calculation and 24% of reported CPI. Using the more empirical measures in the calculation increases today's core CPI from 4.9% to 9%, and CPI from 6.8% to 10.1%. So, bottom line, they seem to be pretty well in line, 10, 11%, if you actually added housing back in like it was calculated back in 1982. And we quickly realize, obviously, that we are not comparing apples to apples when we talk CPI today versus what took place in 1982. So, in one sense, yes, they've got this nice tracker graph of CPI and how that relates all the way back to early mid 70s, somewhere in there. And they highlight the fact that 6.8 is where we're at here today, and we haven't seen levels since that on the tracking mechanism since 1982, right? But it's not the same. The way they calculate it has changed all across this period. And so, again, if we highlight the fact that housing would be entered back into the equation here, this thing would likely be clear back up here and push us probably still about the same time frame, but would be noticeably higher. So nonetheless, they bring that all up to say that yes, these idiots are going to try and adjust this again, just like they have everything else. It's the continual moving of the goalposts. So aside from that, DHL is keeping pace with the holiday rush by adding 1,500 new robots. Not people, robots. The holiday season is helping shipping company DHL usher in automation quicker than it ever has. The shipping and supply chain giant has been rushing to add automation heading into this holiday season, according to a new report from Bloomberg. The company doubled its use of robots in the U.S. this year, the report says, and now has a total of about 1,500 picking robots at its warehouses across the country. The additional automation comes on top of hiring an additional 15,000 seasonal workers, the report said. Oscar DeBach, chief executive, told Bloomberg last week that the additions has helped DHL stay current with orders. Says DeBach commented, the supply chain disruption that we're seeing at the moment is not a one-time thing. Because of the growth of e-commerce, supply chains are now organized differently because you get major hops and jumps at the end of the supply chain, because that's the end consumer. He continued, all the stores and the wholesalers and distributors that used to be in between are now less, and that's why you get more disruptions in supply chains. DeBach said that the company started ramping up its holiday season early this year, allowing it to sidestep bottlenecks and logistic problems that have swept the globe. In order to hire so aggressively, wages have risen as much as 15% in some parts of the U.S., the report notes. DHL has also created 8 centers across the U.S. to recruit and train workers, the report noted. So it appears, even though, yes, they have automated to some degree, it does state that they picked up 15,000 seasonal workers, and that to ensure that the folks that are probably on lockdown or holed up, stuck behind 45 masks or whatever, jabbed to the hilt, they can still get their products. So there you have that. Last but not least, by way of some financials here this morning, smash and grab thieves steal millions in jewelry from Rolls-Royce dealership. So apparently, yeah, this profession seems to be picking up steam, as it were, if you want to call it a profession, but seems like day in, day out, we keep capturing these types of operations. It says thieves are becoming more brazen as they begin to target luxury shops. The latest incident was a smash and grab robbery at a Rolls-Royce dealership in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, according to CBS Chicago. On Saturday afternoon, 2 men, one armed with a handgun, raided the exotic car dealership. One thief used a hammer to break the display cases open and fill bags with expensive watches and other jewelry pieces. In about 30 seconds, the men made off with over $2 million worth of jewelry, according to Joe Perillo, the dealership owner who spoke with CBS Chicago. Says, a city that I love and everybody loves to come to is going to be a desert if they don't stop this. We're going to have people moving out of the city. They're moving out now. They want to just be safe, said Perillo. They're walking into my business, crashing the windows, and the guy stands with a gun, and we have to have this happen? Enough is enough, he said. Perlow voiced his frustration regarding Mayor Lori Lightfoot, aka Beetlejuice's, progressive policies that if they, the thieves, get arrested, they get let go. So, how do you ever intend to solve the problem of increasing retail thefts? He added the county prosecutors and city leaders need to hold criminals accountable. It's only a fool who keeps doing things the same way and expects different results. If the mayor and Kim Fox don't do anything to get control of this, it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse, he said. This luxury smash and grab followed a Louis Vuitton in a metro area that was overrun by a flash mob. During Black Friday, there were other reports of retail stores in the region getting knocked up by thieves. This mayhem is also unfolding across other progressive cities. Last month, a Nordstrom outlet in Walnut Creek, situated in the San Francisco Bay Area, was raided by 90 individuals. A Louis Vuitton in downtown San Francisco was also hit. Smash and grabs are increasing in liberal cities because progressive laws have downgraded retail theft from a felony to a misdemeanor, forcing stores to redesign their storefront entrances to prevent flash mobs. And of course, I don't know what Chicago or Illinois as a whole has by way of some of these progressive policies. If they're like San Francisco, where it's under $950, they're not going to get prosecuted. Many of you probably have seen the case of the store that raised his prices to $951 on every product in the store to outsmart them. Kudos to him. But I don't know if that is necessarily the case in Chicago, but doggone, if they're stealing $2 million worth of watches, I'm wondering why they wouldn't be going after them. And by the way, regardless of their policies, regardless of their edicts and decrees on guns, if you're a shop owner and want to defend your property, get a damn gun. Period. That ain't going to stop until people start taking control of protecting their property. Period. Anyway, outside of some financials on the day here, Joe Biden and other Dems used deadly tornado tragedy to push climate change agenda. Shocker, right? You know, again, we covered a lot of this footage net on Saturday here. If you're on the channel with me here, if not, you missed it. You can check it out. A lot of the damage net from Friday night into Saturday's tornado outbreak across Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Illinois here. All the damage net that ensued, and of course, never letting a crisis go to waste. We get this. Says after the series of tornadoes that left destruction and death in its path, Biden and other Dems used the occasion to advance their climate change agenda. It's a sad commentary on what passes for acceptable today. People are dead, homes are destroyed, and lives are ruined. Yet the left cannot put aside their political agenda for 1 minute. Fox News reports liberals use deadly tornadoes to attack Republicans on climate change. Several liberals on Twitter, including politicians and celebs, pointed the finger at climate change and Republicans following devastating tornadoes in western Kentucky that killed at least 70 people. Says Democratic Rep. Eric Swallowswell. He used the tragedy to take a shot at Republican Senator Rand Paul, who represents Kentucky, accusing him of not caring about Americans who are in need. We should do all we can to help our Kentucky neighbors. God be with them. They are hurting, Swalwell tweeted. But do not, for 1 second, forget that Rand Paul has voted against helping most Americans most times they're in need, says the guy from California who has a Chinese handler, right? Bang, bang. President Biden suggested climate change was to blame for the tragedy, saying, "All I know is that the intensity of the weather across the board has some impacts as a consequence of the warming of the planet and climate change," Biden said. And we'll forego watching numbnuts here speak drivel about this. Some other examples are Swalwell responding to Rand Paul. We get Jamil Hill says, "We know at Rand Paul is a heartless hypocrite. The people in Kentucky deserve the relief regardless of their buffoonish leadership. But if the Dems don't use this against him and his party in the future, it is a missed opportunity. Idiots." Mark Ruffalo, "This is what climate catastrophe looks like. It's only going to get worse from here. Now is a time to fight for our suffering and despairing youth." What? How the hell does that tie in? Freaking idiots. What is wrong with these people? Anyway, interesting piece out of American Lookout here yesterday. Aside from that, City of Chicago will pursue a $130,000 lawsuit against disgraced actor Jussie Smollett. This on the heels of his conviction here as of late. City of Chicago will continue pursuing its lawsuit against disgraced Empire actor Jussie Smollett for wasting $130,000 over Smollett's hate hoax. Smollett, found guilty of 5 felonies by a Chicago jury, is being sued by the city of Chicago for executing an elaborate hoax staged by Smollett and 2 acquaintances. The city is seeking $130,106.15 in the lawsuit. The city filed a civil lawsuit against Jussie Smollett to recover costs incurred by the Chicago Police Department investigating what the city believed to be Smollett's false police reports that he was a victim of a hate crime, a statement from the city of Chicago said. The statement continued, while using a different standard of proof, the jury's finding of guilt convicting Jussie Smollett of criminal charges stemming from the incident confirms that the city was correct in bringing its civil lawsuit. During the investigation, the city logged 1,836 overtime hours for more than 24 police officers. Jussie Smollett tried to countersue the city, but the case was dismissed. U.S. District Court Judge Virginia Kendall told him that he would be able to refile the charges if he was found not guilty after the trial. The 2 brothers Smollett hired to assist his hoax, Abimbola Osundaro and Olbinjo Osundaro, have filed defamation lawsuits against Smollett over their damaged careers and reputations. Aha, the Nigerians strike back! A federal judge put the defamation lawsuit on hold until the completion of the Jussie Smollett sentencing and asked the parties to file a status report with the courts by February 1st, 2022. And there we see the statement from the Department of Law. City of Chicago says it's still going after Smollett for that money, especially after the guilty verdict. And apparently there is the filing in question. You can follow it if you wish. Case 119-CV 04547, filed probably in Cook County, I would imagine. But, yep, just doesn't look like it's getting any better for, Jussie Smollett. Let's see here. Also, Boris Johnson, at least 1 COVID Omicron death confirmed in the UK. So, can't get off scot-free here on the morning without hearing a little bit of COVID-related stuff. I find this part at the top of Sputnik's page here. It says the new COVID variant was initially detected in South Africa and Botswana and sparked major concerns due to its high number of mutations, 32. The World Health Organization dubbed the strain Omicron and warned it may prove to be more transmissible and dangerous than other coronavirus variants. Now, just that statement alone, sitting atop of Sputnik's pages, I'm sure this is just tied to all their COVID-related stories, is absolutely false. It's heresy. At the end of the day, when these things variate, create these variants and morph and whatever else, they don't become more dangerous. Yes, they become more transmissible, but they certainly don't become more dangerous. They become less lethal. And so there you see the propaganda right at the top of Sputnik's page. It says the United Kingdom earlier raised its coronavirus alert level to 4 amid the rapid spread of the new Omicron variant in the country. Shortly afterwards, Prime Minister Bojo called on Britons to receive their booster shots as soon as possible, as UK is now facing an emergency. What is that, an emergency in your head? Who in the UK is squawking over all this stuff? Anybody? Anybody? I'll wait for it. Anyway, UK PM Bojo said on Monday that at least 1 patient has been confirmed to have died after being infected with the Omicron coronavirus strain. 1. What's the population of the UK again? How many millions? Alright, so do the math, folks, for me. 1 divided by whatever the UK's population is, and let me know by the time you shift the zeros over what that percentage is. But run around, by all means, like a chicken with your head cut off. Sadly, yes, Omicron is producing hospitalizations, and sadly, at least one patient has been confirmed to have died with Omicron, Johnson revealed during a visit to a vaccination clinic near Paddington. So I think the idea that this is somehow a milder version of the virus, I think that's something we need to set on one side and just recognize the sheer pace at which it accelerates through the population. Well, statistics be damned, because, by the way, if you go down to South Africa, they say, guess what? It's already peaked. It's on the downside. But hey, go right ahead with your plan B there, Bojo. The Prime Minister underlined that the best thing we can do is all get our boosters, echoing the sentiment he had when the COVID alert level in the United Kingdom was raised to 4 due to the spread of the Omicron strain. Shortly after his announcement, the UK Health Secretary Agency confirmed that 10 people have been hospitalized with the Omicron variant in England, and one individual diagnosed in the hospital has sadly died. Now, was it because of COVID, or was it because of perhaps comorbidities or anything along those lines? Let's ask some questions. Will we get that out of the Mockingbird media, The Guardian, The Independent, or the BBC, or any of the other supposed news agencies in the UK? Of course not, because they have a narrative they want to push. On Sunday, Johnson sounded the alarm, saying that the UK is now facing an emergency as a new variant rips through the country. In order to tackle the new outbreak, the PM unveiled an ambitious vaccination plan. His new goal envisages everyone in England over 18 years old being eligible for a booster jab before the year's end. Never mind the fact that the jab is no good, it only lasts about, 60 days. You'll just get jabbed to infinity. Every time they whip up a new variant, guess what? It's time to go get your jab again. Idiots. Get these idiots out of office. In order to achieve this goal, Johnson said that 42 military teams would be deployed across every region to help the vaccination efforts. Oh, so now they're going full Australia mode. Perfect. Aside from this, working hours in vaccination clinics will be extended and more appointments will be available. Currently, some 3,137 Omicron cases have been confirmed in the UK after a record 1,239 additional cases were registered on Sunday. Health Secretary Sajid Javid told Sky News earlier that about 10 people have been hospitalized in the country over the new coronavirus strain. 10. So not only do you need to do the math on 1 divided by the total population, but 10. Dangerous. Scared. Fear. That's what they gotta push. Anyway, let's end this on a high note here today. Dear God, these frickin' idiots. Breitbart has company makes enough Let's Go Brandon Christmas wrapping paper to cover 6 NFL football fields. And before I get into this article, I'll recollect that another article I came across this weekend. How many of you guys play golf by chance? Perhaps use Titleist balls? Well, Titleist, the woke corporation that they are, apparently you can order Titleist balls with whatever you want on it. If you want logos on it, or if you want insignia on it, things of that nature, you can do so. But apparently, Let's Go Brandon is just way, way too offensive for Titleist. Yeah, they had to construct some policies and things behind the scenes, and if you try to put in Let's Go Brandon to get specialized golf balls, well, you just can't do that anymore. But never mind the fact that in the past they had no problem F Donald Trump, all sorts of negative things about Trump and all those things. That was perfectly okay. So this article says merchandising company bringammo.com has announced that it has made 260,000 square feet of Let's Go Brandon Christmas wrapping paper for the holiday season. Enough paper to cover 6 NFL football fields, they say. The conservative-minded company says that the wrapping paper has been a runaway hit for them this year, and noted that they have already sold thousands of pounds of the item. We've never seen anything like this. Thanks, Joe, said Seth Weathers in reference to President Joe Biden and his cratering presidency, according to the Washington Examiner. The Georgia-based firm sells conservative-themed apparel, most made in America, as well as ornaments, hats, sneakers, coffee mugs, cell phone cases, and many other items. What started as a fun idea for current customers turned into a nationwide frenzy. Since launching, the wrapping paper has consumed 3,000 pounds of raw paper and kept a family-owned Georgia print facility busy around the clock. The company's press release added, "We're having fun with the snowflakes and we're putting money in our local economy. That makes for a very merry conservative Christmas," Weathers added. The phrase, "Let's go Brandon," of course, was accidentally coined by CBS sports reporter Kelly Stavast in October as she interviewed Brandon Brown, the winner of the NASCAR Xfinity Series race. Stavast blatantly mischaracterized a chant that the crowd was yelling, turning what was obviously F. Joe Biden into "Let's go Brandon." Stavast claimed the crowd was trying to cheer on Brandon Brown. Yep, that's exactly what it was. Good job there. So since then, the chant of "Let's go Brandon" has become a trendy way of blasting Joe Biden without using the F word. The chant has rung out at events including football games, concerts, and any other type of event that draws big crowds. And of course, we all recall this. Other recent LGB news included a Let's Go Brandon themed store opening for holiday shopping in Deep Blue, Massachusetts, and an LGB themed boat winning third place in a Virginia boat parade before having the award rudely taken away by parade organizers. Yep, apparently he had some woke parade organizers there who just can't handle it. Nothing offensive about it, by the way. I mean, you can read into it what you want, but there is absolutely nothing offensive about "Let's Go Brandon," right? So anyway, that's what I'll leave you with here this morning. Appreciate you guys tuning in as always, and we'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same place, same bat channel. And by the way, if you are good little boys and girls, perhaps we might have a little fireside here in the very, very near future. So stay tuned on that, and we'll see you back a little later on. Take care. God bless everybody.